From WHQR Public Media, this is The Newsroom. I'm Ben Schachtman. Thanks for joining us. On today's show, it's a conversation with New Hanover County Board of Education member David Perry about how gender is taught and discussed in the schools. Last week, Perry, who was elected in November, joined the board's other Republicans in voting to overhaul the school district's strategic plan, policies, and procedures. The main focus was removing material to comply with recent executive orders from President Donald Trump, which essentially threatened to withhold federal funding from schools if they don't remove DEI and so-called gender ideology from their curriculum. Over the weekend, Perry took to social media to voice his frustration that the media had ignored the gender part of his story, specifically issues involving trans students, and instead focusing on DEI. At the same time, I'd heard from a lot of people, including some of Perry's supporters, but also parents who were very concerned about his stance on trans students. So we invited Perry to come into the studio to discuss his views. This is our unedited interview recorded on the morning of Tuesday, March 4th. All right, New Hanover County School Board member David Perry, thank you very much for being here this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
So over the weekend, you posted a video about your concerns that the media wasn't accurately or sufficiently covering a part of what the board has been doing in terms of removing gender ideology out of parts of the curriculum. And I want to unpack this a little bit so people can kind of understand what you're talking about. And this conversation, at least originally, was revolving around the sex education curriculum. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So tell me what's going on here. What is in the sex education curriculum that the board is looking to remove?
It's mostly the stuff around gender roles and gender identity that I believe was stuck into the Stepping Stones curriculum back during our former superintendent's reign, and when the Stephanie Crable and the Title IX committee made some recommendations in that regard, presumably to go along with then President Biden's reinterpretation of Title IX to include all those kinds of things.
So for people who don't know, you've got three options as parents. You can opt out of sex ed entirely. You can take I believe it's called the My Life.
Yes.
Which focuses more on abstinence-based. And then you've got the Stepping Stones, which includes abstinence but also talks about contraception. And from what I've heard, there's a couple of elements in the curriculum that talk about gender identity, right?
Yes. I don't think those were originally there until a few years ago, but they are there now. And I've got no problems with keeping the curriculum without those additions from a few years back, the ones that talk about contraception. And, I think parents should have that option. So,
Is there anywhere else besides the sex ed curriculum where the board feels like it needs to remove this language on gender identity?
Yeah, we're going to go through at the policy committee, of which I'm a member, we're going to be going through the policies to make sure they aren't stuck in there a little bit, including all the other ones about the normal idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think you could make an argument that, the gender ideology and gender identity stuff is part of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I almost see it as kind of a separate issue, related issue to when we're talking about racial or ethnic diversity, which seems to be what the media wants to talk about, and they don't want to touch the whole gender roles thing.
I gotcha. Yeah, I think I've seen very strong critics of DEI and very staunch advocates for DEI both make contrasting arguments. Like I've seen people on the far right and the far left both say DEI includes gender ideology, and both say no, that's a separate thing. I think the water is pretty muddy when it comes to what DEI actually is.
Right, and in my I think that you could definitely argue that from a conservative perspective that it comes from and it's derived from kind of a socialist perspective where they really want to use these dividing points to push the eventual goal of more of socialist, society and get rid of capitalism, and they're using these divisions as drivers. And the biggest thing is like, when it comes to racial or ethnic, diversity, I just want to be colorblind. I want to treat each individual child as the unique, boy or girl that they are. I think that's what would be the ultimate goal, instead of trying to create this artificial diversity that uses the color of somebody's skin or what country, their ancestors came from in order to determine, we like this makeup better.
Well, I certainly think there are formulations of DEI that have that very hard socialist Marxist bent. I think there are advocates who would argue that there are versions of it that don't include an assault on capitalism, that have to do with either dealing with inequities about how kids get to school, basically like what happens to them before they get to kindergarten,
Right.
or about, attitudes in the classroom that might be discriminatory against not just kids based on race, but based on, handicap accessibility, based on, other disabilities that they might have. I think I've heard different people make different arguments about what DEI is, and some of them include what you're talking about, and some of them have nothing to do with that.
Yeah, and one of the things that kind of really miffs me is when I made the post over the weekend, I still have a lot of people, and even the post that I made, about a week prior, which announced the motion that I was going to make this last Tuesday, and a lot of people are putting in, you don't care about kids with disabilities or learning disabilities, and I mean that's the furthest thing from the truth. I used to work in that field, and we were talking about equipping kids with special needs back in the early '90s when I was not in IT yet, and mainstreaming them and getting them ready to be integrated into our regular school system. So I think you can, I just don't know where that came from, how that got pitched in with the diversity, equity, inclusion, because I think you can have, respect for and want to equip our special needs students without necessarily diving into all that. So.
Well, I'll leave it here because we could do a whole other conversation about DEI, and maybe we will. But I certainly think the past administration did itself both at the White House and in the school board, did itself no favors by leaving DEI so vague about what it was. I think the public is kind of in the dark about what it means.
But whatever your definition of it is, I think that the media, at least until today, is kind of, doesn't want to talk about, the gender identity issue, which is definitely part of what we decided this last Tuesday, that we are going to be ridding, not just in our curriculum, but also in our policies, and getting that out of our school district, because I think it's very destructive. I think we are influencing in a bad way a generation of kids to not be proud of the way they were born.
Okay, so let's get into that, right? Because I think you are correct in that the media has not wanted to touch this issue. It is probably one of the most fraught issues right now. If I was, if I was a politician, this would be the issue I'd be the most careful about dealing with, maybe.
Well, you know me, I just speak my mind, and I think that's one of the reasons the voters liked me at the polls this last November is that I'm pretty straightforward and not bashful.
And even some of your Democratic colleagues on the Board of Education have said that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's start here. In your understanding, what are the limits as established by Trump's executive order as far as what you can and cannot do in a curriculum?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two separate but related executive orders. It's the diversity, equity, and inclusion, which was definitely, hey, I guess you can do it if you want to. You just have to give up the millions of dollars.
Sure. So I mean the Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. That's the title of the executive order.
Right. So, and if you read through it, I mean, there's a lot of things that would apply to funding to the states and to localities, I would imagine. So I'd rather be safe than sorry on this. And these are, again, even if there wasn't an executive order, I campaigned on this stuff because I believe it. So,
but just to back up a little bit, so can you, for example, in a sex ed curriculum, discuss the existence of trans people?
Yeah, I mean, I think Whether that's appropriate or in a sex ed thing, I don't know if that's relevant. But I mean, certainly in another context, of course, you're going to talk about that, current events or something like
Sure.
that.
I mean, one of the debates I've heard is about some of these executive orders pretty sweeping, and so the suggestion that you would if someone identifies as a woman and you refer to them as a woman, that seems to run afoul of the executive order in some people's interpretation.
Right. Well, there's always going to be interpretations.
Yeah.
My interpretation is I just don't want to have anything that's encouraging what I consider to be encouraging of the adoption or getting kids to question needlessly their sex or gender identity, because kids are curious, and but I think it's dangerous to think that just because a child has an imaginary friend that makes it real, vice versa. What they think right now, or what they might question right now, is not necessarily how they're going to feel once they get through puberty. So,
can you give listeners an example of something that's in the curriculum that you feel would encourage that kind of questioning?
I think, well, one, what I mentioned in the stepping stones, but also I'm new to the board, so I can't say that I know every little bit of curriculum. So, I mean, I'm still learning too, but I mean, I've definitely heard some complaints about some of our books in our school libraries. One from somebody who said his granddaughter came home with a book about a cow with one horn who thought he was a unicorn, and it's kind of this conditioning from the get-go that your choice of who you are is more important than what you actually are.
I see what you're saying, but that's not a part of the sex ed curriculum.
No, it's not. But you asked for other things, so
sure, yeah, that's fair. So, all right, to this point, I think what you are suggesting is that there's a social contagion, right, that is encouraging more people to identify as trans than in the past. I think you used the figure 2,000% increase.
Yeah, I mean that's the statistic I heard in the last decade that we've seen the report in the United States. I think it's 4,000% in the UK, from what I've read.
So it's the last study I read was a fivefold, which would not be
what?
That would fivefold, which would be 500%, not 4,000. My point is that I think that's I have not been able to find that number anywhere. I've seen studies in the U.S. that show around a threefold increase, so a 300% increase over the last decade, maybe a little bit higher in the U.K., but I haven't been able to track down 2,000% increase anywhere.
Yeah. Well, I wish I had the quote in front of me, but I did read it. So, but I don't. I'm sorry, I can't to the audience.
So the follow-up to that, right, is the other number that you cited was that 3/4 of these kids who experience gender dysphoria, as you put it, right, are sort of changing their mind and going back to identifying with their sex at birth, right?
Yeah, if you kind of just let them develop naturally and don't intervene. This was the Steensma study from 2013. There's been obviously some people that are pro-transgender who have disagreed with that study, but even it was somewhere between 70 and 94% of once these kids make it through puberty, then they're going to end up identifying with their biological sex. So why would you intervene if it's very unlikely and start like social transitioning or any kind of, or definitely not any kind of, medical transitioning of a child when it's most likely that they're going to probably revert to identifying with their biological sex in the first place.
And just to be clear, the school's not involved in any kind of medical intervention here.
No, we are not involved in that. Actually, I think there was last year the General Assembly actually outlawed any medical
for juveniles.
Yeah.
So the study I saw it was a 2019 National Institute of Health study, gives kind of similar figures. It's like 12 to 27% of kids go all the way through and stick with sort of their gender identity. If you don't sort of intervene, I'm not an expert, but I have to wonder if that prevalence isn't a lot higher if you do allow the social transitioning, like taking on a new name, new pronouns, stuff like that.
Of course, people get used to stuff, and children are malleable. So you start thinking, and your identity is being affirmed.
Sure, but I mean, just to play devil's advocate, would you consider not letting a kid use the gender identity that they feel is theirs, blocking that? Do you feel like that's an intervention?
I mean, blocking what they want to call themselves at home or even in school is one thing. Because that's their personal opinion, and I want to make it clear too. Is I've had a lot of people accuse me, you just want these kids to get beat up or bullied. We have policies against that. I don't want to see any kid bullied, regardless of, what gender they think they are, or for any other reason. So I mean, but the fact of the matter is that I don't want us to be complicit in or going along with this social transitioning. What happens at home, I have no control over. So what parents want to do when they if they want to refer to their boy as a girl, then I guess that's up to them. So,
well, if the child, for some people is a girl. I mean, here's my question: is that a lot of this argument about trans identity in kids came out of the parents' right movement, right? So in 2022. There was a lot of debate, and the Parents' Bill of Rights came out of this, about schools that were withholding information from parents, right, about kids who wanted to change their pronouns and gender identity at school. That upset a lot of parents.
Naturally.
It upset you as a candidate. It upset Melissa Mason, who's now the chair of the board. And the argument was that parents had a legal and ethical and moral right to be right there involved with this. I think that argument was unduly criticized as being bigoted. I think a lot of parents genuinely just want to know what's going on with their kid in school.
Yeah.
How do you see it now if parents do support that and they are a part of it, they are informed, and they do want their kid to socially transition in school? What rights do those parents have?
I mean, I believe in parents' rights for the most part, but I mean, they're not absolute. It doesn't. Obviously, you have to think about the rights of the child as well. So when it doesn't usually, come off when you're talking about abuse of a child. That's not. You don't have a right to abuse your child. Sorry. For the most part, we're going to leave a wide berth for parents to.
But are you suggesting that a parent that supports their child socially transitioning is abusing their child?
I think they don't think so, but I think that they have been, misled as to, that this is a biological thing or that this is a normal thing, and when in fact it's being brought to them by, I believe, forces that are trying to shape the language and convince parents that this is normal, and it's not. Except for maybe the 1 in 20,000 case where there's an intersex condition.
That's a whole other issue, yeah.
But most of this is not biological at all. It's psychological. So I don't. So and I could totally relate to a parent who wants to think that my kid doesn't have any problems. They don't have any psychological problems. This is completely normal. So they're going to buy into to what these people are trying to push. And there is definitely a full movement when it comes to this whole transgender things that the kind of old school, even gay and lesbian community, are some of them against it. And as you know, there are a lot of feminists that are against this too because they think it, like J.K. Rowling and others, who, a woman means woman. It doesn't mean men becoming women.
I understand. Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me, was talking about the media. When you were talking about the media blackout on this issue and how the media does not want to upset the LGBTQ plus community, I think maybe that suggests more solidarity there than there really is. I feel like that community, the queer community, is not united on all issues.
No, I mean I think it used to just be LGB, and then it was T and Q, and I'm not even sure what the I and the A mean, but maybe you can help me on that one.
Intersex and asexual.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just to clear this up, because I've seen people accuse you of some nasty stuff, and one of them is that, you are suggesting that a trans kid is the victim of abuse, and that those parents are should be held morally responsible. I mean, that's a hard line statement, but is that how you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're unwittingly doing it. I don't think they're purposefully doing it. I think that they've been sold a bill of goods, and because they want they care about their children. No one's saying that they don't. It's not like they just, they rented their kid out for prostitution. I mean, no, they care about their child. They, somebody gives them a glimmer of oh yeah, your kid's normal, and oh no, the gender is a spectrum and it's fine and you don't have to worry about it, because every parent wants their kid to be normal. It's kind of like the dying cancer patient who's somebody comes up with the magical mystery cure. Of course, you're going to grasp onto it because you want to live. So,
all right. So from your point of view, even if the Trump executive orders were, say, struck down by the courts, or say you're still on the board in 4 years, and a new administration comes in and once again upends society with a flood of executive orders, you would say this is still the right thing to do?
I would.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with President Trump on some things, but people who know me know that I don't agree with him on everything. So
I guess this is the last question I've heard from advocates, aside from the ones where I'm going to exclude the ones where they've just said very nasty things.
Oh, believe me, there's some really nasty ones, accusing me of all kinds of...
some of the things I could not say on the radio.
Exactly.
But I guess the last issue is that in the experience of parents, and frankly in my own experience, there are real trans people. There are men and women. They exist. They're out there in the community. You might disagree, but they are in your, they're in your care. They are students in your school system. What do you say to those kids who that's their identity?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we respect you as an individual, and as an individual student, I want to treat all of our students with respect, regardless of where they're at. And I feel bad for these kids. It's not like I hate them. This is how they feel right now, and how they feel right now should not dictate how we treat them. Their rights should be protected. They should be treated with respect as individual people. I just don't want to. And when it comes to adults, I mean, hey, if you're an adult and you've been through puberty and this is what you choose, then so be it. I've got nothing to say about that. Adults who want to go this path, but I just don't want to be involved with us facilitating the growth in psychological harm that I believe comes from socially transitioning, students that are just kids at this point and haven't gone through puberty and could very well, if you believe the studies, end up identifying with their biological gender once they're through.
I suppose what I hear from some parents, and again, to your point, I've heard from many parents who agree with you.
Yeah.
But what I do hear from parents who are advocates and parents who have trans kids is that it is difficult to say you respect a child if you won't call them by their name.
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. So I mean, we can talk about names. I'm less concerned about names, but the whole proper pronouns thing, and I think is a little bit ridiculous. But I mean, you got a right to call yourself who you want to call yourself. But I mean, I've got free speech too. But the important thing is let's let kids be kids, and I don't want to get into the specifics whether we should be using their preferred name if they've changed it. But
well, I think that's unfortunately I feel like that's a pretty relevant specific.
But I'm more interested in making sure that, like I said, are there things in the curriculum that are promoting kids questioning their gender identity? And to me, that's more important, to get rid of those things rather than what we're going to do with specific, how we're going to relate to specific kids. Not that that is an important thing to talk about that we should discuss, but to be honest with you, I am less concerned about how we can have a discussion about that, and I'm sure we can come to some reasonable conclusions on how we can treat these kids with respect, whether it includes calling them by their preferred name, I guess, or as long as their parents are okay with that, then that may include that too.
So I guess this is sort of where we're left. You have directed newly minted official superintendent, Dr. Christopher Barnes, to kind of go through the sex ed curriculum, other policies and procedures, looking for DEI and gender ideology issues to comply both with executive orders from the White House and the preferences of the majority of the board.
Right.
How does that process work? Do you have a timeline for that? Do you have, is there a review process where he will, Barnes will bring back his, findings to you and then you vote on it? Or is this sort of now delegated to the administrative level? How does that work?
Well, we have the policy committee, so that's on me.
That's the mechanism?
Well, no, that's just one of the mechanisms.
Okay.
So me and Mr. Wildeboer, Ms. Justice are going to be having to go through every single policy in our entire manual, which is quite extensive, let me tell you. And I'm on the policy committee, and I can honestly admit I have not read probably more than about a third of it. So I'm working on it. So, but we've got that responsibility. Then I believe Dr. Barnes there was a kind of a separate vote brought by Ms. Barnhart to change the strategic plans as far as getting the EDI out of our strategic plan and perhaps replacing it with another goal of ours. It's open for debate. I'd like to see something about transparency. Maybe that'd be a good one. And then we have all the internal policies, the curriculum, and that is what Dr. Barnes is going to be kind of exclusively, dealing with. And then, of course, with our guidance. And so I believe we're talking about the stepping stones tonight because it got tabled on Tuesday and pushed to tonight's meeting. So,
okay. Well, for people who want to follow this process, they can watch these policy committee meetings if they want to join you and Mr. Wildeboer and Ms. Justice for some of these conversations.
Yeah. So, I mean, believe me, if it was up to me, but it's not. I would like to have some call to audiences at some of our committee meetings. I respect the public's right to come in and tell us what they think, and I wish some of the public would engage in more in civil discourse than what they've been putting on my Facebook page. But I want to hear from people, and even if I disagree with them. So yeah, they should come to the meetings and follow the policy. They should come to our. I'm sure there's going to be curriculum meetings. I'm not on the curriculum committee, but I'm sure they'll be talking about maybe other aspects of where some of this stuff is. And I think that, it's appropriate to talk about some of this stuff as long as we're not promoting it. So,
all right. Well, New Hanover County School Board Member David Perry, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that's it for today's show. I'm Ben Schuckman. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us for the next edition of The Newsroom.